Hello, Dr. Robin Franklin back today to talk to you about differentiation. We continued that conversation last time, so we're going to jump right in. I thought I would start today with just a thought about gifted education that kind of hits home for me. It says, gifted kids often want to drink from the fire hose of learning, but in many classrooms they are asked to sip from a trickling faucet. Just kind of let that sink in for just a bit, because oftentimes they are asked to do things that they simply know how to do, and they just really want to be challenged. So today we're going to talk more about this idea of differentiation in curriculum. Here we have my friend Calvin and Hobbs. I wonder how long it's been since I last looked at the clock. Maybe it's been an hour. Well, actually, it's probably only 40 minutes. I'll guess half an hour to be sure. 20 seconds? It's going to be a very bad day. And someone says Calvin set up. And I feel like Calvin is a pretty good representation a lot of times of some of our gifted students. Just kind of holding on to make it through the day, not feeling overly challenged. So how do we differentiate? If we only learn methods, we are tied to those methods. But if we learn principles, we can develop our own methods. And I feel like that is true with this idea of differentiation. Last time we talked, I talked about something called a three-ring circus. So I thought I'd bring a demonstration in today. When I think of differentiation, this really helps me because I don't want to be caught in the trap of thinking that I need to do an individualized lesson for every student, which would be impossible, having so many students in our classroom. But I can always think of differentiation and think of three groupings. And so last time I did talk about going to the circus, and you see three rings. And typically your largest ring is going to be in the middle of the circus, kind of draws your eye. So this will be my largest ring today. I'm going to lay that on the floor. Then I have two outer rings. Notice they are a bit smaller, and I'll lay one to this side and one to this side. And when we think about differentiation, what we want to think about is that you're going to have a large majority of the students in your classroom who are on grade level, who are going to take in your teaching, and they're going to hear what you say, they're going to learn the material, and they're going to do fairly well. You might need to remediate a bit, but that's a pretty large grouping in your classroom. Then, as always, we have another grouping that no matter what you teach, no matter what the standard is, no matter what the objective, they're probably not going to get it the first time out. They need to have multiple touches of the information. And so that grouping I have here, because we know that when we're planning, we're going to have to plan additional information, time set apart for these students in order to get the material. So I want you to kind of think like that. You've got a large grouping that's going to be the one in the middle who's going to receive your information, do fairly well. You're going to have that grouping who's probably below grade level or just hasn't had experience with that concept, so they're going to need those multiple touches. And then we have this group way over here. And this group oftentimes is the neglected group. They're the group who already knew that middle information. They have that, and if you had pre-tested, they probably would have done really well. But this grouping now, when you're planning your instruction, what are you going to do differently with them? How are you going to address their needs? How are you going to challenge them? So in differentiation, if you can think of those three groupings when you're planning lessons, you're going to do really well with this whole concept, and you will not overload yourself with trying to do too much. And this way you can kind of streamline what you're doing with differentiation. So kind of think of the three rings as we go along today, and when you plan a lesson, and I'm going to be asking you in the future to plan some lessons, and I'm specifically looking to see how you can differentiate your instruction for these three groupings of students. key component that we did talk about yesterday is this idea of flexible grouping. That is really the heart of differentiation, and as represented in the groupings that I just showed you. Whole class, pairs, triads, quads, student selected, randomly selected, based on interest, learning profile, readiness, homogeneous, heterogeneous. The beautiful part about differentiation using flexible grouping is that you want it to be fluid. You want students to be able to move in and out of groupings based on their abilities, based on their interest, so that they're not trapped, so to speak, in a specific group. It works really well in the classroom, and it does a lot for you building community and helping your students feel part of the group and not kind of pigeonholed into one specific category. So remember, differentiation, hallmark is using flexible grouping. As in most basic level, differentiated instruction means shaking up what goes on in the classroom so that students have multiple options for taking in information, making sense of ideas, and expressing what they learn. And that's from Carolyn Thompson, How to Differentiate Instruction in Mixed Ability Classrooms. So I kind of wanted to show you this book because this is the book that we're going to be using and talking through. And so a lot of the information that I'm sharing with you about differentiation, I have found in this book. I was fortunate to sit in on conferences with her. Fabulous, and this is so practical. Love this book, and so we're going to kind of work through that in the next few lessons. I also wanted to share what I feel like is someone who's differentiating well. And I was fortunate recently to get to hear Ian Bird at a conference, and he has an excellent website. So I'm going to go to that website, kind of walk you through it. It's birdseed.com, and that's birdseed with a Y. So let's see if we can get this up and running today. When you get to his website, you will see that he has multiple links from language arts to writing to math to creativity. The one I wanted to focus in on today was math. So I just want to show you what's available that he's talking about in his math differentiation classes. He starts out by saying 100%, 100%, 100%. If you've ever taught gifted students math, you're probably familiar with those kids who can knock perfect scores out week after week. You probably also question what good you're doing for those students. They already know it, then why teach it? If a student can score above 90% on material that you have not instructed, it's fair to say they do not need your instruction. Instead, differentiate for these students by offering advanced content or increased thinking skill requirements. So he goes on to talk about why you should pretest, and then once again thinking of the three groupings. And I do want to say that differentiation is important even if you're teaching a self-contained gifted environment. Not all the students in that gifted environment are going to be at the same level. They also need differentiation, so the three groupings work well. So he kind of just sets this up by thinking of the three rings that I mentioned before. Group 1 took a pretest and passed with over 90%. And he's saying typically he finds that to be 1 to 3 students in a classroom setting. Group 2 took the pre-assessment and scored between 80 and 89%, usually up to 5 students. And Group 3 either did not take the pre-assessment or scored below 80%, which is the bulk of the class. So in this grouping, he has Group 3 would be my ring in the middle, and then we have our groupings possibly on either side. So he does give a few hints here. He says, use much of your base program as possible, and he talks about how to do that. So this is just really a practical site that I think you would enjoy. With that said, he also has links to some pretty exciting things. When I click on math, I find this top link to be fascinating. It's a growing collection of links to interesting math data, and he has compiled amazing data that you could use to teach real-world products in your classroom. And things that students would enjoy. For instance, ratios of sugar to Krispy Kreme donuts. If you click on that link, he will take you to a site that has a real-world article and talks about 9 surprising foods with more sugar than a Krispy Kreme donut, full of kind of data and charts. So I think when you're thinking of differentiating and what do I do with this group that's doing so well and all of my math content, there's some exciting helps for you out there, and I feel like he just does a great job with that. So I just wanted to give him a shout out today. His name is Ian Bird, and please visit www.birdseed.com. And it's not just about math. He's done a great job of differentiating many types of lessons. Hopefully this is beginning to look familiar to you. This whole physical representation of differentiation. We've talked about it being a teacher's response to learners' needs, and it's guided by principles of respectful tasks, flexible grouping, and continual assessment. Today we're going to focus on more of the bottom of this chart. Teachers can differentiate through, we've got content, process, product, environment, and according to students' readiness, interest, and learning profile. So kind of focus in on this last part because that's where we're headed today. According to students' readiness, interest, and learning profile. So, getting to how we influence our student learning. If we're going to differentiate based on readiness, interest, and learning profiles, consider the following. If you're going to differentiate by readiness, it's a student's current proximity to specified knowledge, understanding, and skills. What are they capable of and ready to do? Interest. If I'm going to differentiate based on interest, that which engages the attention, curiosity, and involvement of a student, because that's very motivating for our gifted learners. All about choice. And then finally, we can differentiate based on learning profiles. And that's just a preference for taking and exploring or expressing content. It's how we enjoy learning, basically. And I think by now, most students have had opportunities to take some inventories. If not, I'm going to show you how you can do that. The bottom line is know your students, and then finally, know your students. In Carol Ann Tomlinson's book, you will find this chart, and I also am including this on Blackboard for you. It's called the equalizer. And I know you can't really see it that well on the screen, but I want you to spend time with this chart to begin to make sense of it. And it really deals with the idea of readiness, what students are prepared to learn. It's an entry point relative to a particular understanding or skill. So to help a student grow, we begin where a student is. Oftentimes when we're trying to figure out where a student is, I hear what a student is not able to do. They can't do this, well, they can't do this, they can't do that. Well, I firmly believe that they can do something. So let's start with what they can do. So if they're not prepared yet to write a 5-paragraph essay, maybe if we back up, they can write a really good paragraph. Okay? That's a good starting spot. So that's the readiness level. So we need to figure out what students are capable of doing and begin there. So she has this continuum, and the continuum gives clues for where they are ready to begin a task. And it goes from something called foundational over to transformational. And as you see, some students very concrete, but can we move them to the area of being abstract? So it's kind of like, if you think about it, if you've worked a soundboard before, it would be as if you are fine-tuning the soundboard to exactly what that student is ready and prepared to do throughout the lesson that you're going to teach. So this is just something that we're going to kind of delve into a bit, and you will find that in the book that I shared with you and also as a posting on Blackboard. But there are some very specific ways we can work towards differentiating for readiness. Students give clues all the time. We just need to be investigators and figure out exactly where they are. Pre-test, 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 pre-test. Oftentimes, many of our basal books and our textbooks come prepared with some pre-tests that we could possibly use. I enjoy using pre-tests, especially in math. I would give all the students a pre-test, and some of them would tell me, I don't know any of this, and I would say, that's fine, this pre-test is totally for me, so I can decide how I'm going to teach you. And then when it was all finished, I may have had one or two who did very well in their pre-test. Majority, 20s, 30s. And then I would teach my unit, differentiating for those who had knocked it out of the ballpark. And at the end, I would give them a similar test as a post-test. And I would compare their scores. And what was beautiful about it is I would actually send those papers home to parents so they could see that when we began, their student had a 20%, and when we ended, their student had a 98%, which I think validates you as a teacher as well to say, wow, look how far we've come. So pre-test really can be powerful in this idea of differentiating. Data provides evidence, and I know now we're in a data-driven environment. You have probably tons of data at your disposal, and that data is going to help determine, so we're not shooting in the dark. Kids come to us now when we know a lot of information about their reading levels and their math levels, and that will help us plan for this idea of differentiating. Readiness may change, and this is the beautiful part, it may change, thus the need for flexible grouping. Students interact with material differently. They've had varied experiences in their lives, so they might come to the table and do fairly well on one concept, and then the other concept never had any experience, not had any kind of past teaching. They may not know it at all. So the idea that I can go back to my 3 groupings and I can move in and out of them based on what the concept is very exciting, and I think it will make your classroom very fair, and I believe that students are really tuned into fairness in your classroom, and I think this will help with that. So make sure that you change it up, that the groups are very flexible. Here are a few routes to readiness differentiation. So if you want to differentiate for readiness, which I am going to ask you to prepare some lessons, and one of the options can be for you to differentiate that lesson based on readiness. And here are some ideas for you. You can have varied text by reading level. So if you're doing novel studies in your classroom and you can pinpoint the levels that would be more appropriate for different groups, but let's say that the topic is the same, but the books are different, that would be an appropriate readiness level differentiation. Varied supplementary materials, varied scaffolding, how you push in and push out and do that zone of proximal development to help students where they need to be helped, and sometimes when we step back so that they can fly. Tiered tasks. And that might be a new term for you. That's something we're going to delve into. I'm going to teach you a little bit about doing that. Flexible time use and small group instruction are all ways that you can differentiate based on readiness. Some other ideas, homework options, tiered or scaffold assessments. We don't often think about changing up our assessments. We think a lot about changing up our instruction. Compacting. That sounds interesting. Mentorships, negotiated criteria for quality, and varied graphic organizers. These are just some real strong ways that we can differentiate for readiness. But let's move on to the next idea of differentiation, and that would be by interest. Notice I have student choice. Students are highly motivated if they have options. So interest refers to a student's affinity, curiosity, or passion for a particular topic or skill. The advantage to grouping by interest is that it allows students to attach what they have been learning in class to things that they already find relevant, meaningful, interesting, and appealing. So how do we do this? Well, there are tools to find out about kids and what they think and what they like. There are surveys, questionnaires, observations, inventories, conversations, just chatting with them, analysis of work. It requires students to be aware of their own readiness, interest, and learning profile. And I don't believe that students are ever too young to begin this process of figuring out their own learning inventory, their own learning choices, their own learning styles, their interests. Students have choices provided by the teacher. Now, you're still in charge here, okay? So when I say students have choice, I like to call it forced choice. And what I mean by that is all the options are good. I've approved them, I've designed them. It's just not random. Occasionally, I do give students the option to tell me what they would like to create. If they do that, if they take that road, it has to be well designed prior to the implementation of that. They have to come up with a plan, and they let me know what that plan is, and we have to have pre-approval. Most of the time, I have options that I have designed that are all really good. So once again, this choice does leave you still in charge of crafting these challenging opportunities. Use choice across the curriculum between writing topics, content writing prompts, self-selected reading, contract menus, math problems, novel studies, product and assessment. The bottom line is it guarantees a buy-in and enthusiasm for learning, which cannot be understated when we're differentiating. Student interest surveys can be found just about anywhere. I have a folder on Blackboard for you that I have just dumped tons of student interest surveys in there based on grade levels, different things like that. But all you have to do is go to Google, you can Google just about anything and put in student interest surveys, and they'll come up by grades, for instance, elementary, high school, middle, subjects. So I would suggest that if you're looking for a fresh way to survey your students, typically at the beginning of the year to find out what their interests are, this would be a really good place to start. And feel free to use any of the ones that I've put in Blackboard for you. I do want to talk about one that I've used quite a bit. It's called glyphs, and I don't know if you're familiar with a glyph. But a glyph, you might see part of the word hieroglyphic in there. A glyph is a symbol that conveys information non-verbally. And they may be used in many ways to get to know more about your students. And I've put one in for you. This would be just a simple one that you could do at the beginning with younger students. There are name tag glyphs that work really well at the beginning of the year when you're trying to get to know students. I thought I would bring one and show you. A few years ago, I was really interested in my staff using glyphs across grade levels. And so to get started, we actually did one as a staff, kind of back to school. And if you look at the glyphs we created, we began with kind of a person that didn't have many qualities, just a shirt, some shorts. And they could choose between a red shirt or a blue shirt. And then once they chose that, we let them design their person. And there are all kinds of different ideas on here, from buttons to stickers to colors to symbols. And all of those mean something. And it comes with a chart that goes with the glyph at the end. And you can see that based on button choice, if you chose one button, the question was, what do you like to do in your free time? And one button meant that that person liked to read. 2 buttons, they love the computer. 3 buttons, they love to work on a project. And 4 buttons, they like to go outside. So you can see this person put 2 buttons, so that meant computer time. The stickers, if they had 1 sticker on their person, they like to work alone. If they had 2 stickers, they like to work in a group. And if they had 3 stickers, they are very flexible. Shoe colors meant subjects in school that they really enjoyed. For their right shoe, they were supposed to put their best subject, and we gave them a choice. Reading was red, writing was green, math was red, yellow. Social studies was green, and science was blue. So it was like, I think the left shoe was the more difficult subject. And so as they designed these, we also asked them to put stripes on their shoes if they enjoyed verbal instructions, dots if they liked to see instructions, if they liked visual prompts, buckles if they had and enjoyed hands-on activities, and if they put music notes on theirs, that meant that they really liked to have music involved in their teaching. So this, once again, we asked the teachers to do with their students, make a bulletin board in their classroom and have these displayed so that during instructional time, they could always have a quick glance to possibly give some student choice in how things were going to roll out for projects and other things. So glyphs, pretty exciting form of getting to know your students. Learning profile is another way to find out how students learn. I have just bookmarked a site here for you and that you can go to. It's called the BARC model by Neil Fleming, and students can go into this and they can actually take an online learning profile that then you could use in your classroom to decide the best way to differentiate. Here are some factors to consider when you're differentiating. By readiness, gender and culture play an important role. Group orientation, learning environment. You can see some students like quiet, some like noise, some like warm, some like cool. Their intelligence preference, which goes a lot into, of course, your multiple intelligence. Your cognitive style. These are things that we really want to know our students. We want to get to know them so that we can be the best teacher that we can for them. Once again, this is a chart from Carolyn Thomason that I have placed on Blackboard for you. She gives you options for differentiating based on readiness, based on interest, and based on learning profile. She tells you how you can gear your instruction in these ways. And for instance, if you want to do it by readiness, you can adjust the task familiarity, or you can adjust proximity of ideas to students' experiences. If you want to do it by interest, you can give choice of mode of expressing their learning. If you want to differentiate by learning profile, you can create an environment with flexible learning spaces and options for students. So this is, once again, I think a real structured way for you to start the journey of differentiating. Begin slowly. We just want you to begin, okay? This idea of differentiating for student readiness and learning profile and choice. So I've included this chart for you that even tomorrow you can begin to process your own information and see, am I already differentiating? I bet you are. And give yourself some checks here for things that you're doing, and then begin to move in some new directions of other things that you could do in your classroom to differentiate for students so that you can be the best teacher possible for all the students in your classroom. Thank you.